When Garrett Walsh stopped at the red light on Fifth Avenue at 2:37 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon with an engagement ring burning a hole in his jacket pocket and his new girlfriend, Madison, sitting beside him, talking about dinner reservations for their 3-year anniversary at the Italian place where they had had their first date, he looked out the windshield and saw someone crossing the street who made his entire world tilt sideways in ways he couldn't immediately process, couldn't make sense of, couldn't reconcile with the reality he'd been living for the past 3 years. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't someone who just looked familiar in that vague way where you think maybe you went to college together or worked at the same company years ago and so on. It wasn't his imagination playing tricks on him after 3 years of trying to forget her face and the way she'd left in the devastating silence that had followed. It was Simone Harper, the woman he'd loved and lost 4 years ago, the ex-girlfriend who disappeared from his life with barely an explanation beyond vague statements about needing space and not being ready, walking across the crosswalk, holding the hands of 2 small children, identical twin boys who looked maybe 3 years old with matching blue jackets, in the same dark curly hair, in the particular way they walked that spoke of being utterly connected to each other. And when Garrett did the math in his head, while the lights stayed red and time seemed to stop, and the Saturday afternoon traffic noise faded into background static, he realized with devastating clarity that those children would have been conceived almost exactly when Simone left him, that if they were 3 years old now, they'd have been born 4 years ago, which meant conception happened right around the time she'd moved out overnight and ghosted him completely, that the timeline matched perfectly in ways that couldn't be coincidence. And the twins had his eyes, the particular hazel green that Garrett had inherited from his mother, had his nose, the slightly crooked one from breaking it playing high school football, had his smile recreated in miniature on 2 small faces that were walking away from him toward a life he'd never known existed, toward a reality that had been unfolding parallel to his own for 3 years without his knowledge or consent or participation. Garrett Walsh was 32 years old and had spent the last 3 years rebuilding a life that Simone Harper had demolished when she'd left him 4 years ago after 2 years of living together in a small apartment in Brooklyn. 2 years of talking about marriage and children and the future they'd build together. 2 years of Garrett believing he'd found the person he'd spend his life with until she'd come home one Tuesday evening and said she needed space, that she wasn't ready, that this wasn't working, and had moved out that same night while Garrett stood in their apartment trying to understand what had just happened. Trying to figure out what he'd done wrong or said wrong or failed to notice that had made the woman he loved pack her belongings into trash bags and leave like their 2 years together had been a mistake. She needed to escape. She ghosted him completely after that, blocked his number, deleted her social media, disappeared so thoroughly that Garrett didn't even reach out to ask for real explanations beyond the vague non-answers she'd given while packing. He'd been devastated in ways that surprised him with their depth and duration. Had spent a year barely functioning, going through motions at his architecture firm, losing weight, losing sleep, losing the particular optimism he'd carried about relationships and trust and the possibility of building permanent things with another person. Eventually, he'd recovered, had started dating again cautiously, had met Madison at a friend's wedding 2 years ago and found her easy to be with, uncomplicated in ways that felt safe after Simone's inexplicable departure, stable where Simone had been unpredictable. Madison was great, genuinely great, kind and funny and supportive of his career, and patient with his lingering wariness about commitment, and they'd been together 3 years now, living together for the last year, and Garrett had decided it was time, that he'd healed enough, that Madison deserved the proposal she'd been not so subtly hinting about. So he'd bought the ring 2 weeks ago, had made reservations at the expensive Italian restaurant for tonight, had practiced what he'd say when he got down on one knee, and had spent this Saturday afternoon driving into the city with a Madison chattering beside him about whether they should order the seafood special or stick with their usual pasta dishes, completely unaware that in Garrett's jacket pocket sat a 2-carat diamond ring and a future he was about to offer her. Simone Harper was 30 years old, had been the love of Garrett's life 4 years ago. The woman he'd planned to marry before she'd vanished from his world with explanations that explained nothing, leaving Garrett to spend months analyzing every conversation and moment, trying to figure out what he'd missed, what signs he'd failed to see that she was planning to leave. He'd never gotten answers, never understood why someone who'd seemed happy and committed had suddenly needed to escape. Never knew if he'd done something wrong, or if she'd simply stopped loving him, or if there was someone else, or if she'd just been lying about wanting the same future he wanted. At 2:37 p.m. on Fifth Avenue, the red light holding him in place, Garrett saw Simone crossing the street holding the hands of twin boys who looked maybe 3 years old, and his brain automatically did the math that would become his obsession for the next several hours. 3 years old meant born roughly 4 years ago, give or take a few months for how old they actually were versus how old they looked. Born 4 years ago meant conceived 4 years and 9 months ago, which was almost exactly the timeline of when Simone had left him, when she'd suddenly needed space and wasn't ready and had to go immediately. The timeline matched perfectly, impossibly, devastatingly. Madison didn't notice because she was looking at her phone, scrolling through Instagram and showing Garrett pictures of her friend's new apartment while he sat frozen, staring through the windshield at his ex-girlfriend and 2 children who might be his sons walking away from him across Fifth Avenue. The light turned green, cars honked behind him, impatient Saturday afternoon drivers wanting to get where they were going. Madison looked up from her phone. "Babe, the light's green. You okay?" Garrett couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't process what he was seeing and what it might mean. "I need to park," he said finally, his voice sounding strange even to himself. "Right now." He pulled over illegally, double-parked in front of a boutique with its hazard lights flashing, and Madison saying, "Garrett, what's wrong? What's happening?" Confusion turning to concern as he unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the driver's door without explanation. He ran after Simone on foot, dodging pedestrians on the crowded sidewalk, following the blue jackets on the twin boys who were maybe his children, catching up to them at the corner where they'd stopped to wait for another light. "Simone," he said, his voice carrying more emotion than he'd intended, more desperation and confusion, and 4 years of unanswered questions compressed into her name. She turned and her face went white, in that particular way faces do, when you see someone you had hoped to never see again, when your past appears in your present without warning. Recognition flickered across her features, then shock, then something that looked like fear, and in that moment Garrett knew with absolute certainty that whatever he suspected was probably true, that the timeline and the resemblance and her sudden departure 4 years ago were all connected in ways she'd been hiding and he'd been living without knowing. That his life was about to change in ways that would make proposing to Madison tonight impossible. If you believe that some truths stay hidden until the exact moment we're not ready to face them, subscribe to Love is Kindness for stories about the past arriving in the present exactly when it will change everything. What would you do if you saw your ex with children who might be yours walking across a crosswalk right before you were about to propose to someone else? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Simone turned at the corner of Fifth Avenue at 2:38 p.m., 1 minute after Garrett had seen her crossing the street with twins who might be his children, and her face cycled through emotions so quickly Garrett could barely track them. Recognition and shock and fear and something that looked like resignation, like she'd known this moment would come eventually and had been dreading it for 3 years. "Garrett," she said, her voice careful, controlled in that way people sound when they're trying very hard not to fall apart. "Hi." The greeting was absurd given the circumstances, given that they hadn't seen each other in 4 years, and the last time they'd spoken, she'd been packing trash bags with her belongings and refusing to explain why she was leaving, beyond vague statements about space and readiness that had explained nothing. Garrett looked at the twins, these small boys standing on either side of Simone, holding her hands, identical in ways that made them unmistakably brothers, maybe 3 years old with dark curly hair and light brown skin, and faces that looked so familiar. Garrett's chest hurt. "Who?" he started, his voice not working properly, then tried again. "Are they yours?" Simone's voice was shaking when she answered. "Yes, they're mine." "How old are they?" Garrett asked. Though he already knew, had already done the math in the car while the light stayed red, but he needed to hear her say it, needed the confirmation. "3," Simone said quietly. "They just turned 3 last month." 3 years old, Garrett repeated, doing the math out loud now because he needed her to hear it, needed her to understand that he was connecting the timeline, that this wasn't going to be something she could deflect or minimize, which means they were conceived 4 years ago. Right around the time you left me, right around the time you said you needed space and moved out overnight and disappeared from my life without real explanation. Simone's silence was confirmation louder than words, her face showing guilt and fear, and the particular desperation of someone whose secret has just been exposed. "Are they mine?" Garrett asked. The question direct, unavoidable, the only thing that mattered in this moment. "No," Simone said, but the word came too fast, too defensive, the kind of denial that sounds like lying, even if it might be true. "They're not. Their father, he's not in the picture. Please just let this go, Garrett. Please." She tried to walk away, tried to pull the twins with her down the sidewalk. But Garrett stepped in front of her, not aggressive, but firm, not letting her disappear again the way she disappeared 4 years ago. "Simone, I'm not stupid," he said, his voice carrying 4 years of unanswered questions and the shock of what he was seeing. "They have my eyes. Look at them, really look at them, and tell me you don't see what I see." The twins were named Lucas and Owen, Simone finally admitted when Garrett kept blocking her path, kept demanding answers, their names coming out like surrender. Lucas, the twin on her left, looked directly at Garrett with curiosity uncomplicated by adult tension, with the openness of 3-year-olds who haven't learned yet to be suspicious of strangers. "Who's that, Mommy?" Lucas asked, his small voice cutting through the sidewalk noise, through Garrett's rising panic and Simone's visible fear. "Just an old friend," Simone said, her voice breaking on the word friend, because they both knew that didn't capture what they'd been or what this moment meant. Lucas tilted his head, studying Garrett's face with the intensity of children trying to make sense of something. "He looks like Owen," Lucas said matter-of-factly, turning to examine his twin brother, then back to Garrett. Even the child saw the resemblance, the undeniable similarity between Garrett's face and these small boys who might be his sons. At 2:42 p.m., 4 minutes after the confrontation began, Garrett processed evidence with the systematic precision of someone trying to make sense of impossible information, cataloging every detail that supported the conclusion he was already reaching. Timeline matched perfectly. 3-year-old twins meant conception 4 years ago, which was exactly when Simone had left him suddenly and without adequate explanation. Physical resemblance was undeniable. The twins had his eyes, that particular hazel green that wasn't common, had his nose, slightly crooked in the same way, had his smile recreated in miniature. Her sudden departure 4 years ago now made devastating sense. No real explanation because the real explanation was pregnancy, and she'd chosen not to tell him. Her nervousness now radiated guilt and fear, the body language of someone whose secret has been discovered and who knows there's no way to hide anymore. The child's observation that Garrett looked like Owen confirmed what Garrett was seeing, confirmed that even a 3-year-old could see the family resemblance. And her non-denial was perhaps the strongest evidence. She hadn't said, "They're not yours," she'd said, "Their father's not in the picture," which wasn't the same thing at all, which left room for the possibility that Garrett was the father but just wasn't involved, wasn't in their lives, wasn't in the picture, by her choice, not his. At 2:45 p.m., Garrett's voice shifted from confused to demanding, from asking to insisting, because this was no longer a chance encounter that could be dismissed or explained away. "Simone, tell me the truth. Right now. Did you leave me because you were pregnant? Did you find out you were carrying twins and decide I shouldn't know? Did you hide my children from me for 3 years? Simone was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face while she held the twins' hands and tried to maintain composure in front of her children who were watching this confrontation with a particular alertness of kids who know something is wrong, even if they don't understand what. "I can't do this here," Simone said, her voice barely audible over the Saturday afternoon traffic. "Not on a street corner, not with them listening." "Then where?" Garrett demanded, his voice louder than he intended, drawing looks from passing pedestrians who were trying not to stare but couldn't help noticing the drama unfolding. "When? Because I have a right to know if these are my sons. I have a right to know if you've been raising my children without telling me. I have a right to understand why you left and why you lied and why you thought I didn't deserve to be their father." Madison appeared then, having found parking somewhere, and followed Garrett on foot to this corner where his past was colliding with his present in ways that would destroy his future. "Garrett, what's going on?" she asked, confusion evident in her voice and her face as she took in the scene. Her boyfriend, standing on a sidewalk, confronting an unknown black woman and 2 small children, everyone crying or upset or both. "Who is this?" The question hung in the air, awkward and heavy, while Garrett tried to figure out how to explain in ways that wouldn't make this worse than it already was. "Madison, this is Simone," he said finally. "My ex, from 4 years ago." Madison's face changed as understanding clicked into place. As she processed ex-girlfriend plus twins plus Garrett's panic plus the physical resemblance, she could probably see even from several feet away. "Are those," she started, looking from the twins to Garrett to Simone and back to the twins, the question unfinished but perfectly clear. "I don't know yet," Garrett said, the words coming out defeated because that was the truth. He didn't know, not officially, not with certainty, just with terrible suspicion that was growing stronger with every passing second. At 2:50 p.m., Simone made an offer that felt like both escape and promise. "Can we talk? Privately? Not here, not on a street corner where the twins can hear and strangers are watching and everything feels impossible." "I'll wait in the car," Madison said, her tone carrying hurt and confusion and betrayal all tangled together, carrying the knowledge that her boyfriend had been about to propose, and now he was standing on Fifth Avenue, maybe discovering he had secret children. Simone gave Garrett her phone number, digits he'd deleted from his contacts 4 years ago when she'd blocked him, when he'd finally accepted she wasn't coming back. "Call me tonight," she said. "After you figure things out with her, I'll explain everything. I promise." She left with the twins, Lucas and Owen, each holding one of her hands. And as they walked away, Lucas turned and waved at Garrett with the unself-conscious friendliness of 3-year-olds who haven't learned yet that adults are complicated. Garrett stood on the sidewalk with his world shattered, with the engagement ring still in his jacket pocket, and Madison walking back to the illegally parked car, and Simone disappearing into Saturday afternoon crowds with children who might be his sons. At 2:55 p.m., in the car that Garrett had double-parked 18 minutes ago, with completely different plans for this afternoon, Madison asked the question that mattered. "Were you going to tell me?" Her voice was quiet, controlled, the kind of calm that comes from being furious but trying not to show it. "I didn't know," Garrett said, the defense immediate and true. "I swear to God I didn't know. I haven't seen her in 4 years. I had no idea she had kids." Madison stared at him. "You were going to propose today," she said, and it wasn't a question. "I saw the ring box in your jacket pocket this morning when you were getting dressed. I've been waiting all day for you to ask." "How did you?" Garrett started, but Madison cut him off. "I'm not stupid, Garrett. I know what a ring box looks like. I know what fancy restaurant reservations and you being nervous all morning means." Silence filled the car, heavy and suffocating. "Do you want to marry me?" Madison asked, her voice breaking on the question. "Or do you want to chase your ex-girlfriend and her maybe children and figure out if you've been a father for 3 years without knowing it?" "I don't know," Garrett said, the honesty devastating them both. I don't know what I want anymore. Everything I thought I knew just changed in the last 20 minutes. Madison got out of the car without another word, opened the passenger door, and stepped onto Fifth Avenue and started walking. Not back toward their apartment, but just away. Away from Garrett and the impossible situation he'd somehow ended up in, through no fault of his own except being at a red light at exactly 2:37 p.m. "Call me when you figure it out," she said before closing the door, leaving Garrett alone in the car with an engagement ring he couldn't give and a phone number for an ex-girlfriend who might have hidden his children from him for 3 years. At 7 p.m., 4 hours and 23 minutes after seeing Simone cross Fifth Avenue with twins who might be his children, Garrett sat in his apartment alone and called the number she'd given him, his hands shaking as he pressed to the digits because this phone call would either confirm or destroy the suspicion that had been consuming him since 2:37 p.m. The phone rang twice before she answered, her voice cautious. "Hello? Are they mine?" Garrett asked, skipping greeting and small talk and any pretense that this conversation was about anything except the single question that had been destroying him for 4 hours. The pause that followed felt infinite, stretching seconds into eternities, while Garrett held his breath and waited for Simone to either confirm or deny what he already knew in his bones. "Yes," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're yours." "Why?" Garrett asked, the word coming out strangled because yes opened 1,000 more questions, created a grief and anger so profound he didn't know how to contain it. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me think we were breaking up over space and readiness when really you were pregnant? Why did you disappear and raise my children without me? Why did you steal 3 years of their lives from me?" "Because I was scared," Simone said, and Garrett could hear her crying through the phone, could hear the same guilt and fear he had seen on her face at the corner of Fifth Avenue. Simone's story came out in pieces, fractured by crying and pauses, where she struggled to explain decisions she'd made 4 years ago, decisions that had seemed rational then, but sounded inexcusable now. 4 years ago, she'd found out she was pregnant, had taken the test alone in their bathroom while Garrett was at work, had seen the positive result and felt terror instead of joy because they had only been together 2 years, and neither of them had been planning this, had been using protection that had apparently failed. At 12 weeks, she had gone for her first ultrasound and discovered it wasn't one baby, but 2. Twins who would make everything harder and more expensive and more overwhelming, who would require twice the diapers and twice the clothes and twice the childcare and twice the complete life restructuring that came with unexpected parenthood. She'd panicked in ways that now seemed selfish, but then had felt necessary, protective even. Sitting in the ultrasound room looking at 2 tiny heartbeats and thinking about Garrett, who was just starting his architecture firm, who was working 70-hour weeks trying to get clients and build a portfolio, who was stressed about money and stressed about whether his business would survive its first year, and stressed in ways that made him thin and exhausted and often short-tempered, not with her but with life, with circumstances, with the pressure of trying to build something from nothing. She didn't think they were ready for 1 child, let alone 2, didn't think Garrett could handle the pressure of fatherhood when he was already barely handling the pressure of entrepreneurship, didn't think their relationship was strong enough to survive the stress of twins and financial strain and all the ways unplanned pregnancy destroys couples who aren't prepared. She thought, and this was the part that made her voice break completely, that Garrett would resent her, would resent the babies, would feel trapped by circumstance into a life he hadn't chosen, hadn't planned for, hadn't wanted yet, even if he might have wanted it eventually. That his dreams of building a successful architecture firm would die because she'd gotten pregnant, and now he'd have to support a family instead of investing in his business. That he'd stay with her out of obligation, not love, and eventually grow to hate her for ruining his life, for trapping him, for taking away his choices and his future, and his freedom to build a life he wanted instead of the life biology had forced on him. So Simone made the decision alone, without consulting Garrett or telling him or giving him any opportunity to have an opinion about his own children, made the choice that she thought was protecting him from being trapped, when really she was just taking away his right to choose whether he wanted to be trapped. She didn't tell Garrett she was pregnant, broke up with him instead, using vague language about needing space and not being ready. That wasn't technically lying because she did need space to figure out how to raise twins alone, and she wasn't ready to be a parent, but also wasn't the real reason she was leaving. She moved back to her mother's house in Brooklyn, raised Lucas and Owen alone for 3 years, worked 2 jobs while her mother provided childcare because daycare for twins cost more than 1 full salary, told everyone who asked that the father wasn't involved because that was easier than explaining she'd never told him the children existed, never asked Garrett for help, never filed for child support, never reached out to say, by the way, you have sons who are learning to walk and starting to talk and look exactly like you. Never gave him the opportunity to be their father because she decided 4 years ago in that ultrasound room that he was better off not knowing, that his life would be better without the burden of unexpected fatherhood, that she was doing him a favor by disappearing. You stole 3 years from me, Garrett said, his voice shaking with anger that had been building since 2:37 p.m. and was now exploding into words he'd been holding back for hours. You decided I wasn't capable of being a father without asking me. You made that choice for both of us. For all 3 of us, really, because Lucas and Owen didn't get to have a father because you decided they didn't need one, that you knew better than biology or law or basic human decency what was best for children you were carrying. I deserve to know. They deserve to know. They deserve to have a father who was present from day one instead of showing up 3 years late because you finally got caught. I know, Simone said, crying so hard now she could barely speak. I know I was wrong. I know I made a terrible decision. I was scared and I was young and I thought I was protecting you, but really I was just protecting myself from having to ask for help, from having to admit I couldn't do this alone, even though I tried to do it alone anyway. But I can't undo it now. I can't give you back 3 years. I can't make Lucas and Owen babies again, so you can be there from the beginning. I can only move forward and try to make it right, even though I know right is impossible now. What do you want from me now? Garrett asked, the question exhausted because anger was giving way to grief, to the realization that he'd been a father for 3 years without knowing it, that he'd missed first steps and first words and first birthdays, that his sons had lived 3 years of life without him, and he could never get that back, no matter how angry he was or how much Simone apologized. Nothing, Simone said, her voice small and defeated. I saw the woman you were with today. You've moved on. You have a life. I'm not trying to ruin it. I'm not asking for money or support or anything except, and she paused, and I just need you to know they exist because the boys are starting to ask about their father. And I don't know what to tell them anymore. I don't know how to explain why they don't have a dad when all their friends at daycare do. Tell them the truth, Garrett said, his voice hard despite the tears running down his face. Tell them their father didn't know they existed because their mother decided not to tell him. Tell them that he would have been there from day one if he'd known. Tell them that now he does know and he's not going anywhere. Because whatever else happens, whatever I decide about my life, in my relationship, in my future, Lucas and Owen are my sons and I'm their father, and that's not negotiable. 1 week later, Garrett hadn't proposed to Madison, obviously couldn't propose to someone when his entire life had been upended by discovering he had 3-year-old sons he'd never known existed, when the future he had been planning had been replaced by a past he had been excluded from and needed to integrate into a present that looked nothing like what he'd imagined 7 days ago. He and Madison were on a break, that ambiguous relationship state that usually means over, but nobody wants to say it yet. Madison, having told him to figure out what he wanted and then call her, told him she couldn't sit around waiting while he processed fatherhood and ex-girlfriends and the particular chaos of learning your life wasn't what you thought it was. Garrett had been meeting the twins, 3 careful meetings orchestrated by Simone in neutral locations where Lucas and Owen could get to know this stranger who was apparently their father. First meeting at a park where Garrett pushed them on swings and tried not to cry watching these small boys who had his face laugh with uncomplicated joy. Second meeting at a pizza place where Owen spilled juice on Garrett's shirt and Lucas told him with 3-year-old seriousness that pepperoni was the best food in the whole world. Third meeting at Garrett's apartment where the twins explored his space with the particular curiosity of children discovering new territory, where Lucas found Garrett's old sketchbooks and asked if he could draw too, where Owen built towers with blocks Garrett hadn't owned until yesterday when he'd panic bought children's toys at Target. They were funny and smart and energetic in ways that exhausted Garrett, but also filled something he hadn't known was empty. These boys who had his personality somehow, despite never meeting him. Lucas, who loved drawing the way Garrett had loved drawing as a child before architecture became his profession. Owen, who loved building things the way Garrett built buildings now. The genetic inheritance, undeniable in ways that went beyond physical resemblance into temperament and interests in the particular ways they moved through the world. Garrett had asked for a paternity test because he needed official confirmation, needed legal documentation, not because he doubted, but because this would have legal implications, custody and child support and parental rights that required proof beyond resemblance and timeline calculations. Simone had agreed without resistance, had taken Lucas and Owen to the clinic for cheek swabs, had waited with Garrett for results that took 5 business days to process. 99.9% match. Official confirmation that Lucas and Owen were his biological children. That he was their father legally and genetically and in every way that mattered. At a coffee shop 2 weeks after the red light on Fifth Avenue, Garrett and Simone had the serious conversation that would determine how the next 18 years of their lives unfolded, sitting across from each other with the awkwardness of exes who now had to be parents together, who had to move beyond anger and betrayal into functional co-parenting. "I want to be their father," Garrett said. The statement firm because this wasn't negotiable, wasn't something he was willing to compromise on. Really be their father, not just weekend visits or occasional dinners. "I want a custody arrangement. I want my name on their birth certificates. I want them to know I'm their dad, not some friend of mommy's who shows up sometimes." "I want that too," Simone said, tears forming because she'd wanted this for 3 years but had been too scared to reach out, too ashamed of her original decision to admit she'd been wrong. "I've wanted it since the day they were born. I was just too scared to contact you, too afraid you'd hate me, too worried you'd take them away completely as punishment for hiding them." Garrett hired a family law attorney, spent money he had been saving for the engagement ring and honeymoon, and married life to instead navigate custody agreements and birth certificate amendments in the legal process of becoming officially his son's father. They worked out 50-50 custody, Garrett getting them Wednesday through Friday, Simone getting them Saturday through Tuesday, the split designed to give both parents substantial time without making the transitions too frequent for 3-year-olds still adjusting to having a father suddenly appear in their lives. He paid child support retroactively for 3 years, wrote a check that hurt his savings account, but felt necessary, felt like the right thing to do, even though no court had ordered it, even though Simone hadn't asked, because his sons had needed support for 3 years, and the fact that he hadn't known they existed didn't mean they hadn't needed food and clothes and diapers and the 1,000 small expenses that come with raising children. He added them to his health insurance, set up college funds with automatic monthly contributions, became legally their father in ways that meant responsibility and commitment and showing up not just when it was convenient, but always, permanently, irrevocably. Garrett called Madison 3 weeks after the red light, after the paternity test results, and the custody arrangement, and the reality that his life had fundamentally changed in ways that weren't temporary or negotiable. "I can't marry you right now," he said, the words coming out harder than he'd expected, because Madison was good and kind and hadn't done anything wrong except fall in love with someone who turned out to have secret children. "I have sons, twin sons, and I need to focus on them. I need to figure out how to be their father. I can't be planning a wedding when I'm learning how to make peanut butter sandwiches, without cutting off the crust because Owen won't eat them otherwise. I understand, Madison said, and Garrett thought she probably did understand intellectually, even if it still hurt, even if she'd spent 3 years building a relationship that was now ending because of children who'd existed the entire time they had been together. I do understand, but I can't wait around while you figure out co-parenting with your ex-girlfriend. I can't be the person you come back to if this doesn't work out. I deserve better than being second choice to a life you didn't know existed. They broke up with the sad necessity of people who care about each other, but whose timing is catastrophically wrong. Madison saying maybe in another life, and Garrett agreeing maybe, both of them knowing that another life wasn't this life, that the engagement ring in his jacket pocket would never end up on her finger. 6 months later, Garrett's life looked completely different in ways that would have been unimaginable at 2:37 p.m. on that Saturday afternoon. The twins stayed with him Wednesday through Friday every week, 3 days that had required him to completely redesign his apartment, converting his home office into a kid's bedroom, buying bunk beds and toy storage, in the particular chaos of children's belongings that seemed to multiply exponentially. He'd learned to cook kid-friendly meals, mastered chicken nuggets and mac and cheese, and the art of hiding vegetables in foods 3-year-olds would actually eat. Did school drop-off and pick-up on his days, navigating the particular culture of preschool parents and pick-up lines, and remembering which child was allergic to what. Attended parent-teacher conferences where Lucas's teacher praised his artistic ability and Owen's teacher expressed gentle concern about his reading readiness. Where Garrett sat beside Simone and they presented united front as parents, even though 6 months ago they'd been strangers. 4 years ago they'd been lovers, and now they were something else entirely. Something defined entirely by shared responsibility for 2 small boys. Went to soccer games where Lucas played with more enthusiasm than skill, cheering from sidelines beside other parents who didn't know his complicated history, who just saw another dad supporting his kid. Helped with homework when Owen struggled with reading, spending patient hours with phonics, flashcards, and simple books. Discovering that fatherhood was less about grand gestures and more about showing up consistently for small moments that built into childhood. He was exhausted but happy in ways that surprised him, ways that suggested this life, while not the life he'd planned, might be the life he was meant for. Simone and Garrett's relationship was not romantic. That ship had sailed 4 years ago and sunk spectacularly with her pregnancy and departure, but it was respectful co-parenting, built on communication and compromise, and the shared goal of raising healthy, happy children. They texted constantly about logistics and schedules and the mundane details of parenting, coordinated drop-offs and pickups, supported each other through the particular challenges of raising twins. "You're a good dad," Simone told him one Friday during kid exchange, the compliment simple but meaningful coming from someone who'd once decided he wasn't capable of fatherhood. "I wish I'd been one from the start," Garrett said, the regret permanent even as he moved forward. "I'm sorry I took that from you," Simone said, the apology inadequate but sincere. "I'm sorry I was so angry," Garrett replied. "We both made mistakes, but we're fixing it now. That's what matters." Lucas and Owen knew Garrett was their dad now, called him dad with the casual ease of children who'd adjusted to new reality faster than the adults had, the transition taking 2 months of careful explanation and consistent presence before it felt natural. Owen told everyone at preschool, "My dad's an architect with the particular pride of 3-year-olds who think their parents' jobs are the most important in the world." Lucas drew a picture labeled "My Family," showing 4 stick figures, himself and Owen and Simone and Garrett, the family constellation that existed now, even if it didn't look like traditional family, even if mom and dad lived in separate apartments and were never getting back together. Garrett had cried when Lucas gave him the drawing, had framed it and hung it in his apartment as a reminder that family wasn't about romance or traditional structure. It was about showing up and staying and loving children who needed you. 1 year after seeing Simone cross Fifth Avenue with twins he didn't know were his, Garrett sat at a park pushing Lucas and Owen on swings and thought about the life he'd almost chosen. What if he hadn't looked up from Madison's conversation about dinner reservations? What if the light had been green and he'd driven past without stopping? What if he'd proposed to Madison that night and never known he had sons? He'd have children he never met living parallel lives he never saw. They'd have a father they never knew, growing up with a particular wound of absence, even if they didn't understand why he was absent. Madison deserved better than half his heart. Better than a husband whose attention would always be partly elsewhere, wondering about the ex-girlfriend he'd never fully understood losing. This was where he was supposed to be, pushing his sons on swings, listening to their laughter, being present in their lives in ways he'd missed for 3 years, but wouldn't miss again. Garrett had sold the engagement ring 2 months ago, couldn't keep it when it represented a future that would never happen, couldn't return it to the jeweler without feeling like failure. So instead he'd sold it privately and deposited the money into Lucas and Owen's college funds. Old life transforming into new life. Old dream becoming better reality. The symbol of one kind of love, funding another kind of love that turned out to matter more. At a custody exchange 6 months after the red light, Simone told Garrett something that felt like absolution, even though he wasn't sure either of them deserved it. "Thank you for not hating me," she said quietly while the twins gathered their backpacks. "Thank you for showing up. They needed you. I needed you to step up, and you did. You didn't run. You didn't make this a legal battle. You just became their father." Garrett looked at Lucas and Owen, these boys who were his entire world now. "They're my sons," he said simply. That's not something you walk away from, even when you're angry, even when it's hard, even when the timing destroys the life you were planning. You stay, you show up. That's what fathers do. Garrett Walsh was about to propose to his girlfriend of 3 years at 2:37 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon when he stopped at a red light and saw his ex-girlfriend from 4 years ago crossing the street with twin boys who had his eyes and his nose and his smile. Children he'd never known existed because Simone Harper had gotten pregnant and left him without explanation. Deciding alone that he wasn't ready to be a father, that telling him would trap him, that disappearing was kinder than asking him to choose between his dreams and his children she was carrying. It wasn't a romantic twist where exes reunite and realize they're meant to be together. It wasn't a second chance love story where the red light brings back what was lost. It wasn't about Garrett and Simone finding their way back to each other because that relationship ended 4 years ago and stayed ended even when they became co-parents. It was about a man learning in one devastating red light that he'd been a father for 3 years without knowing it, that his ex had made an impossible choice out of fear and love tangled together, that she tried to protect him by excluding him and ended up stealing 3 years he could never get back. And that sometimes the life you're about to choose isn't the life you're meant to live. Garrett didn't marry Madison even though the ring was in his pocket and the reservation was made, and she would have said yes. He didn't reunite with Simone, even though they now spent hours every week coordinating custody and school events and the particular intimacy of raising children together. He became a father instead, learned to co-parent with the woman who'd stolen 3 years of his sons' lives but was trying desperately to give him the rest. Discovered that the engagement ring he had been carrying wasn't meant for a proposal but for a college fund. That the love he'd thought he wanted with Madison paled next to the love he didn't know he had for Lucas and Owen. That sometimes seeing your ex at a crosswalk doesn't ruin your life. It reveals the life you should have been living all along, the life that existed parallel to yours without your knowledge, but was always meant to intersect, always meant to become your reality, even if the timing was catastrophically wrong and the discovery was devastating, and the path forward required rebuilding everything you thought you knew about who you were and what you wanted. Sometimes the people we almost miss become the people who matter most. And the worst timing reveals the truth we desperately needed to see, even when we weren't ready to see it. What would you do if you discovered you had children you never knew existed? Would you walk away from the life you'd built? Or would you try to integrate two impossible realities? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and rate this story on a scale of 0 to 10. Because somewhere right now, someone is about to propose or start a new job or make a life-changing decision, and they have no idea that one red light or one chance encounter or one moment of actually looking up instead of looking past might reveal children or truth or family they never knew existed, might change everything in ways they can't predict but might desperately need.